Hello whisky fans, it's an exciting day today because we've got a brand new release from Laphroaig Distillery. This is Laphroaig Sherry Oak Finish. Probably anyone that's seen a few of my videos is going to know that I've got a little bit of a love-hate relationship with Laphroaig Distillery. I think Laphroaig is probably the favourite distillery of anyone that's just getting into their Islay whisky, because it's got that big hit of peat, it's nice and sweet, it's very accessible. In my opinion, for someone that's not completely peat averse, Laphroaig is generally a very approachable, beginner-friendly peated Scotch. And I must say that I've been there myself. I've got a lot of love for things like the Laphroaig 10-year-old cask strength, released every year, and it varies year to year, but every year is an absolutely phenomenal and really good value whisky. What I hate is that they still insist on bottling their 10-year-old expression at 40%, which in my opinion makes it really, really weak and underpowered and completely lacking in flavour, and a lot of their expressions are still polluted with additives. Talking about E150A spirit caramel, because if you make a fine craft whisky, really nectar of the gods, and then you dump a load of burnt sugar in it, polluting is exactly what you're doing there. Anyway, let's have a look at this one that we've got here. So this is a very new release. I basically placed my order as soon as it was available. Comes in the standard Laphroaig tube, comes with whatever that is, in fairly standard Laphroaig green glass bottle. I will say that I've scanned over the label and tube several times. I can't find any reference anywhere or online as to whether this is natural colour. Also can't see any reference as to whether it is or isn't chill filtered, so it would seem that Laphroaig still aren't quite ready to make that commitment to producing a proper craft quality level whisky. But there you go, they've only been at it for a couple of 100 years now, so maybe they'll get there eventually. Anyway, this whisky that we've got here, there were two things that surprised me about this one. One is that it's got an age statement, because generally Laphroaig is one of those distilleries where they've got their 10-year-old and their cask strength edition. They've got their super expensive ultra premium, like your 25-year-olds and things like that, which are just insanely priced. And then everything else tends to be some sort of cask finish variation of different casks in a no age statement whisky. The days when we had an 18-year-old that was widely available, or even a 15-year-old Laphroaig, are pretty much gone. But I'm really pleased that Laphroaig have decided to stick with even a 10-year-old age statement on this one. The other thing that I was really surprised at is the ABV. This actually comes in at a very respectable, if that'll actually get in focus there, it's 48% ABV. So that's, I think, the same ABV as the Triple Wood and some of the other special editions from Laphroaig. And I can't stress how happy I am that they've decided not to bottle this at the standard 40%, because like the standard 10-year-old, they'd have absolutely ruined it. Now, they do always say that you have to take the rough with the smooth, and the disappointment that goes with those pleasant surprises with this one for me is that this is not a sherry oak edition or sherry oak matured, it's sherry oak finished whisky. So we actually know from the Laphroaig website that this one is matured in refill sherry and ex-bourbon American oak, and then it's finished in European oak sherry wood. Now, the fact that they specify that the sherry oak that they use for the finishing is European makes me think that the sherry casks that they use for maturing some of the whisky is probably not European oak, might be maybe sherry hogsheads or maybe even sherry treated ASB bourbon casks. But that's enough of that, it's all conjecture. Let's get some in the glass and see if it's any good. What I have noticed about this one, two things, is one, the colour. So I did say that it doesn't say anywhere as to whether this is natural colour or not, But the colour of that isn't what you really expect from a heavily E150A artificially coloured whisky. It's really not a usual colour for a whisky at all. I'd say the colour is actually very, very dark, and it's not the usual straw or gold that you get out of your typical bourbon matured whiskies, and it's not really got that warm sherry tint either. It really is a dark brown rather than a gold. It's actually not that far off the colour of a tawny port. And another thing, if you get some on your fingers when you pour it, like I just did there, I have noticed that it's actually quite sticky. The actual feel and texture and viscosity of it, it isn't what you might be used to with a normal whisky. I'm just going to put a little bit on my hand here. Just rub that in. May regret putting that much on my hands. But when it starts to dry, it actually gets quite tacky. So a lot of you will probably know that the Scotch whisky regulations stipulate that the casks that you use for maturation or finishing, it's really sticky, must be empty when the whisky is racked into them. But from how this whisky feels on your skin, it really makes me think that these casks must have been really, really fresh sherry casks. Anyway, let's get to the nose. This is Laphroaig Sherry Oak Finish 10-year-old. So immediately on the nose, you can really tell that there's been quite a lot of sherry influence on this one. Getting lots of notes of sweet, nutty marzipan. Very sweet and full orangey notes, as well as lots of medicinal, sort of antiseptic TCP Laphroaig notes, so like antiseptic floor cleaner and the sort of stuff that you smell when you go into hospitals, and lots of resinous piney notes as well. Lots of medicinal aniseed and clove, a little bit of salty licorice, and there's a tiny little hint of fruity apple on the nose as well. There's not as much of sweet and sugary fruitiness on the nose of this one as there was on the Laphroaig Carchis 2020, the port and wine casks, but then you'd expect that to be the case because there's been no port casks used in this one, it's just bourbon and sherry. But there is a slight jamminess on the nose of this one, as well as lots of that sweet vanilla peat, just so you know that you're drinking a Laphroaig. Something that I do always love about Laphroaig as well, that you get on the nose of this one. It's a strong note of peated grist. If you've ever done the distillery tour at Laphroaig and they hand you a sample of the peated grist to smell, there's definitely a strong aroma in this that smells exactly like that cereally peated barley with all those lovely peat phenols in it. It's a really lovely and distinctive aroma. So let's see how it tastes. So as with any Laphroaig, or young Laphroaig at least, getting lots of sweet, warming vanilla peat, as you always do in a Laphroaig. Some really nice herbal, warming, medicinal clove, and some really nice orangey notes. Also getting a little bit of aniseed, and on the palate, I said that I didn't really find this on the nose, but on the palate there is a little bit of a fruity jamminess. So something that you might associate more with a port treatment. Just going to have a little bit more. I do think that the medicinal quality of the young Laphroaig does go really well with that sherry influence. When you put the two together, it's almost like a Dundee cake soaked in Dettol. So you've got all of that sugary fruitiness and nuts and all of those bad things that you get in a Dundee cake, with all of those medicinal sort of Dettol floor cleaner, bandages and rubbery notes that you get in any good peated South Shore Islay whisky. It's also quite a spiciness coming through from the sherry oak, and I would guess that's probably coming from the European oak sherry casks that are used in the finishing, getting quite a warming sense of spice, and it's really something quite festive. So something like cinnamon and aniseed, maybe a little bit of nutmeg, really does give you the impression of sort of really well-made, homemade hot chocolate at Christmas, that sort of thing. Saying that, I do think that you can tell that this is a sherry finish rather than a full-term maturation. I think that sherry, a lot of the sherry notes have a habit of just sitting on the top of the base flavours rather than getting a proper integration. Because this has had a finishing period, it doesn't integrate quite as well as it could do. And I think that the sherry finish, I think it also makes the whole experience a little bit simpler and a little bit milder than it could have been, especially considering that this is 48% ABV. I did kind of expect this to be a little bit more flavour packed than it is. So I'm just going to have one more sip and I'll look at the finish. So I do actually really like the finish on this one. It's lovely and sweet and salty, getting some really nice notes of Fisherman's Friend. If anything, curiously, I think the finish on this one doesn't suffer at all. I think that the palate is a little bit simple, but the finish is quite long, very long, and it really has a good amount of body and depth to it. So what grade am I going to give to Laphroaig's latest offering, the 10-year-old sherry oak finish? I think it's going to have to be a B-. So that is a lower mark, slightly lower than what I gave to the Laphroaig Triple Wood, and it's a lower mark than the Cartius Port and Wine casks as well. But I must stress that it's not a bad mark. For me personally, the way I grade whiskies, A is absolutely exceptional, so sort of almost once in a lifetime whiskies go into the A category. If you get into the A-, that's really a good achievement. B+ to B- is the very good territory. C+ to C- is the good territory, and anything below that is possibly not worth your time. So for this new offering from Laphroaig, I'm going to say it's the low end of very good. I think I probably would have gone a little bit higher, maybe a B or maybe even a high B, if it wasn't for the fact that Laphroaig Triple Wood and last year's Laphroaig Cartius exist. I think that this one, it's just not quite as medicinal as the Triple Wood. It's not quite as spicy, and it covers up a little bit more of the peat. And it's just not got that curiosity oddball factor of last year's Cartius. But it is a very good whiskey. So this one, I don't know what the price is going to be like where you are, or if the price may come down after the initial release. But I paid £60 here in the UK for this one. And I don't think that's too unfair a price, but I do think that I possibly wouldn't buy it again. I don't regret buying this first bottle, but I do feel like it's perhaps more of a £45 to £50 bottle of whiskey. By all means though, anyone out there who hasn't tried it, I do recommend buying a bottle, even at £60, and giving it a go, because it's a really good whiskey and it's a really interesting and welcome addition to the Laphroaig lineup. So let me know in the comments what you think of this whiskey if you've tried it, or if you're looking forward to trying it, and what you think of cask finished whiskies. Cheers.